He thought it was just another piece of scrap metal on his farm, until he uncovered the rusted nose of a buried plane, a forgotten relic from World War II. But what he found inside, it wasn't just parts or old uniforms. It was a hidden truth, sealed away for nearly 80 years. This isn't just a story about war. It's about betrayal, legacy, and one man who refused to let the past stay buried. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Ethan Carter was a quiet man in his late 50s, living a simple, solitary life on the outskirts of rural Alabama. After the sudden passing of his wife 5 years ago, he had retreated from the noise of the world, finding solace in the rhythm of nature and the creaking old barn on his late father's farmland. His only companions were a loyal dog named Buddy and the rolling fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Each morning, Ethan woke before dawn, sipping black coffee on his porch as the fog lifted from the earth like a curtain. He wasn't looking for excitement. In fact, he avoided it. But on one humid morning after a thunderstorm, something unusual caught his eye, a sliver of rusted metal peeking from the soft, wet soil near the edge of his property. Curious but cautious, he approached it. It didn't look like farm equipment, and it certainly didn't belong there. With his boots sinking into the mud and the sun slowly rising behind him, Ethan had no idea that this would be the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but also unearth a forgotten piece of American history. Ethan couldn't shake the image of the rusted metal half buried in the earth. The next morning, armed with nothing more than a shovel, a crowbar, and an old army-issued canteen, he returned to the spot. The soil was still damp, soft from the previous day's storm, and as he dug, the dirt gave way easier than expected. Inch by inch, a larger structure began to emerge, too large to be a tractor and too angular to be any modern-day machinery. After several hours of digging in the muggy Alabama heat, Ethan stood back, wiped the sweat from his brow, and stared, wide-eyed. The outline of a metal fuselage had begun to take shape beneath the soil. His heart pounded, not from exertion, but from disbelief. This was no piece of junk. This was an aircraft. He ran his hand over the jagged edge of the exposed frame. The metal was worn, corroded, but unmistakable, a World War II-era bomber. Its glass nose shattered like a broken eye staring into the sky. How could something this massive be resting beneath his field for all these years, unnoticed? It made no sense. There had never been talk of plane crashes near his property. No signs, no wreckage, just open land passed down for generations. Still, the evidence was clear this was a downed warplane. But why was it buried that night? Ethan couldn't sleep. Images of twisted metal and forgotten dog tags swirled in his mind. Memories of his own father, a Woiwod veteran who rarely spoke of the war, began to resurface. Ethan remembered a single story, a hushed tale his father told once during a stormy night, whiskey in hand, about a bomber that vanished on a return flight. Never found. Ethan had dismissed it as folklore. But now, was this that plane? The following morning, Ethan returned with a flashlight, tarp, and camera. He cleared more of the dirt from what appeared to be the cockpit. The glass was long gone, eaten away by time and nature. Crawling inside carefully, he felt as though he were trespassing on sacred ground. Cobwebs clung to the walls. Vines snaked through the ruptured metal, but inside, something remained. On the pilot's seat was a rotting leather satchel, almost completely blackened with age. With trembling hands, Ethan opened it Inside were brittle papers, some illegible, others miraculously preserved. There was a flight log, handwritten, noting a mission over the Gulf of Mexico. But the final entry was abrupt. Unfinished engine failure, losing altitude, no visibility. Then, at the bottom of the bag, something heavier, a small, rusted tin box. Sealed. Ethan hesitated. He pried it open. Inside a bundle of letters, tied with twine, and one faded black and white photograph, a young man in uniform, arm around a smiling woman holding a baby. Suddenly, the air in the cabin felt thick. Ethan could barely breathe. This wasn't just a machine. This was someone's story. Someone who never came home. Ethan took the letters inside and spread them across his kitchen table. The ink had faded, but under the warm light, he could make out pieces. Dearest Clara, I'm sorry I missed Annie's first steps. I swear I'll make it up to you. Just one more run and I'm done. Tell Mom I got her package. Those cookies survived better than my last co-pilot. I dreamt about the farm last night. The wind through the corn. I'll be back before the harvest. Promise. Each letter was a glimpse into a life suspended in time. A man full of hope, unaware he would never return. Ethan sat there for hours, reading them again and again, his eyes wet with tears he didn't realize were falling. He knew what he had to do. Ethan reached out to a local historical society. At first, they were skeptical, a buried plane on your farm. But when he showed them the photo and the letters, everything changed. Within days, archaeologists, military historians, and news crews descended on his quiet property. Experts confirmed the impossible. The aircraft was a B-26 Marauder, lost in 1944. Its crew was presumed dead. Its wreckage never recovered until now. But what stunned them most was how intact it was, as if the Earth had chosen to preserve it, like a secret waiting for the right hands to find. During the excavation, they uncovered more artifacts: the co-pilot's ring, an ammunition belt, a tattered American flag. But one discovery shook everyone: a dog tag, lodged beneath the rudder, caked in rust. Lutu James H. Whitaker, USAF. It was him, the man in the photo, the one who wrote those letters. His name had been etched into stone at a war memorial for decades, listed as MIA, presumed dead. But now, thanks to Ethan, his story could be completed. News of the discovery spread across the country. Veterans reached out. Families of other lost airmen began sharing their own stories. For many, it wasn't just about closure. It was about remembrance. And for Ethan, it was personal. He had started this journey alone, just a man and a piece of land. But now, he felt connected to the past, to the people who came before him, to a truth long buried but never forgotten. As he stood beside the fuselage under the setting sun, watching the American flag gently wave above the wreckage, he whispered, "You're not forgotten. You're home now." The news of the buried bomber's discovery had turned Ethan's quiet farm into a magnet for attention. Military historians, reporters, and curious townsfolk flocked in, some bringing flowers, others simply wanting to lay hands on a relic of the past. But even as the excavation progressed, one thing kept nagging at Ethan: the right wing of the plane. Unlike the rest of the fuselage, the wing was unnaturally heavy. Too heavy. When a crane lifted the corroded section for the first time, it groaned with resistance far more than anyone expected. Ethan noticed the crew exchanging uneasy glances, but no one said a word, until one of them, a young technician named Matthew, tapped the side with a crowbar and shouted, "It's hollow, but something's inside." The digging stopped. Cameras turned. Silence fell over the field as Matthew and the others began carefully prying open a small access hatch that had been hidden beneath layers of mud and rust. It took nearly 20 minutes, but when it finally gave way, what lay inside made everyone freeze. There, wrapped tightly in oil-stained canvas, were 4 small metal cases, each no larger than a toolbox. Ethan's heart skipped. They pulled the first one out and set it on the ground. A historian from the Air Force opened it slowly, revealing a cache of golden bars, stamped with foreign markings and the date 1943. Gasps erupted. Inside the second box, military intelligence files, sealed documents marked "Classified Eyes Only." The third case contained priceless artifacts, what appeared to be antique European jewelry, watches, and rare coins. One piece, a sapphire brooch, looked like it belonged in a museum. And the fourth, empty. That's when things got tense. The military liaison on site immediately called for a secure perimeter. Within hours, unmarked black SUVs arrived, and men in suits and sunglasses stepped out. One of them approached Ethan with calm but firm authority. "Mr. Carter," the man said, "what you've uncovered may go far beyond a simple war relic. We need to take custody of these items immediately." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't want anything from it. I just want to know, why was it here?" The man hesitated, then offered a vague reply. "Sometimes, during war, planes carried more than just bombs." But the answer didn't satisfy Ethan. Something didn't sit right. Why would a World War II bomber, flying a routine mission, be secretly transporting gold, classified intel, and stolen European treasures? And more importantly, what happened to the missing 5th box? That night, Ethan sat by the fire in his den, staring at the black and white photo of James H. Whitaker. The soldier's eyes still smiled, even through the worn edges of the photo. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that the young lieutenant had known something, maybe even tried to hide it. The next morning, Ethan returned to the crash site before dawn. The military had already roped it off, but Ethan walked the perimeter until something caught his eye. Just beyond the tree line, where the plane's wing had nearly clipped a cypress tree, there was a disturbed patch of soil different from the rest. Recent, uneven. He crouched down, brushed away the pine needles, and felt the faint outline of something hard beneath the surface. Digging with his hands, Ethan unearthed a weathered tin box, almost identical to the others. His breath caught. Back at the house, though, he opened it alone. Inside was a leather-bound journal, sealed with a button clasp. It was fragile but intact. The first page read, "Property of J. Whitaker. Do not open unless I'm gone." Ethan read the journal in stunned silence. In Whitaker's tight, neat handwriting, he confessed a secret mission. The plane had been diverted under direct orders from a high-level intelligence branch, its true purpose to recover stolen Nazi gold and artifacts and transport them back for U.S. analysis. But Whitaker wasn't comfortable with it. He wrote about a disagreement with his commanding officer about how some items were never meant to leave Europe, and that transporting them felt like theft, not war. Then came the final entry. "If you're reading this, then I failed to land. I tried to hide the 5th box. It holds the one thing they can't bury." Ethan's hands trembled as he read on. The last page revealed that the missing case contained something not made of gold or jewels, but documents. Proof that several American and European officials had been complicit in smuggling wartime loot under the guise of military operations. It was a scandal so large, Whitaker feared it would be covered up forever. Ethan now understood everything. Whitaker had buried the truth literally in hopes that someday someone would dig it up. Someone like Ethan. But what should he do with it now? He called the Air Force liaison again, asked to meet privately. The agents returned. Ethan handed them the box without resistance, but made one thing clear. "If you bury this again, I'll go public. All of it. The truth matters." The agent nodded. "You have my word." Whether that word would be kept, Ethan would never know. But he had done his part. Weeks passed. The media frenzy died down. The remains of the plane were carefully relocated to a historical aviation museum in Montgomery. A memorial plaque was placed near the crash site with the names of Lucht, Whitaker, and his crew. But Ethan kept something for himself, the journal, carefully sealed and stored in a safe place. One rainy evening, he visited the local high school's history class to share the story. He showed the letters, the photograph, and told them about a young man who tried to do the right thing in the middle of a war full of wrong. The students listened, wide-eyed. Ethan smiled. That was the real treasure. A month had passed since the last military vehicle rolled off Ethan Carter's land, leaving behind little more than churned-up soil and fading caution tape. The air had grown colder, and the once crowded field had returned to its usual quiet, save for the occasional crow or whisper of wind. But Ethan was different now. He no longer woke in the same silence that once comforted him. The mornings felt heavier, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Every time he walked past the spot where the plane had rested, he felt a strange weight in his chest, not fear, not regret, but unfinished business. One morning, while sorting through an old cabinet in his late father's workshop, Ethan stumbled across a box he didn't recognize. Dusty, unlabeled, and sealed with rusted hinges. Curious. He cracked it open. Inside were old radio logs, letters, and maps, most of which looked military-issued. Ethan squinted at the dates, 1944. The same year Whitaker's plane went down. Buried at the bottom was a worn-out envelope addressed to John Carter, Carter Farm, Alabama, his grandfather. The return address, Lieutenant James H. Whitaker. Ethan's hands trembled. How could this be? He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single, folded letter and a photograph, this time, of Whitaker and another soldier standing beside a B-26 Marauder, the same model now lost to time. On the back, scribbled in ink barely legible, me and Jack Carter, England, March 44. Jack Carter, Ethan's grandfather. The letter was short, hurried, but unmistakable. Jack, I've done what we talked about. The 5th case is hidden. If anything happens to me, you know where to look. Don't let them bury the truth. They'll come for it, maybe not now, but one day. Keep the journal safe, and keep your boy safe too. Jimmy. Ethan sank into the nearest chair, heart pounding. The journal. The 5th case. It wasn't just fate that he found them. It was family. His grandfather and Whitaker had served together, and more than that, they had conspired to hide something the world wasn't supposed to see. His entire perspective shifted in an instant. For years, Ethan had believed his family's history was simple. Generations of farmers, living quiet lives on borrowed land. But now, he saw a lineage of quiet guardians, men who carried heavy truths without ever speaking them aloud. His father had known that was why the story had come out that one stormy night, tucked in a bottle of whiskey. Not as folklore, but as a veiled confession. And now it all made sense, the tools left in place, the cabinet tucked away, the stories never told. Ethan wasn't just a man who stumbled onto history. He was a part of it. And it wasn't over. Later that week, Ethan received a call from Grace Warren, a military archivist who had worked on the recovery project. "There's something strange," she said, her voice cautious. One of the intelligence documents from the 4th case, The one with the artifacts, it referenced a secondary drop point. Coordinates match your region. We think there might be a second aircraft. Ethan's blood ran cold. A second plane, he asked. Yes, possibly smaller. Maybe even civilian. We think it was used as backup transport. If that one crashed too, it may still be out there. She paused. You might want to take a look near the West Ridge. If your grandfather knew about the fifth case, he may have known about the second craft too. Ethan didn't waste time. By that afternoon, he and Buddy were walking the western edge of the property land that hadn't been touched in decades, overgrown and forgotten. It was the one place his father had always said to leave alone. Too rocky for farming, too remote for building. But as Ethan climbed over a patch of thick brush, his boot struck something solid. A metallic clang. He dropped to his knees, brushing back the moss and grass. Another hatch. Smaller than the B-26's, but intact. Another plane. It took days, help from a few trusted friends, and borrowed equipment. But eventually, the Earth revealed its secret. A downed Cessna, rusted through, half swallowed by time. Inside the cockpit, two skeletons. One wore a dog tag. Captain Leo Merrick. A name Ethan didn't recognize, but one that would soon make headlines. In the back of the plane were several empty crates, but tucked inside the floor panel was a film reel, still preserved in a waterproof container. Grace helped Ethan get it digitized. What played on the screen made their jaws drop. Footage of soldiers unloading gold, paintings, crates of documents into unmarked trucks. Men shaking hands. One of them was wearing an American general's uniform, but his name had been redacted in every known record of the mission. The footage was damning. Proof that a small group of high-ranking officials had orchestrated the smuggling of war treasures for personal gain and used two small crafts to do it. Whitaker had known. Merrick had known. And now, so did Ethan. That night, Ethan stood alone in the field again. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, or maybe it was just the clarity settling in his mind. He finally understood his role not as a bystander, but as a witness, a voice for the silenced. The question now wasn't whether the truth would come out. It was how, and when. For several nights, Ethan barely slept. The digitized film footage played over and over in his mind, grainy black and white scenes of soldiers handling war loot like shadows moving in a nightmare. Among them, a general with no name, overseeing the quiet burial of history. That reel didn't just confirm suspicions, it shattered the illusion. Everything Whitaker had tried to protect, everything Captain Merrick had died keeping hidden, now rested in Ethan's calloused hands. He stood at the edge of a decision: stay silent or speak up. The easier choice was clear. Say nothing. Let the military clean it up. Let the story fade again, like so many others buried with time. But as Ethan reread Whitaker's journal and the letter to his grandfather, one line echoed louder than the rest. The truth can be forgotten, or it can be protected, but only if someone's willing to carry it forward. That someone was now him. 3 days later, Ethan made his move. He contacted a documentary filmmaker, Amelia Strauss, a renowned war journalist who had covered global conflicts and previously exposed classified government operations. She had been awarded for her integrity and for the enemies she made telling the truth. When Amelia received Ethan's email, complete with attached clips from the reel and photographs of the journal and letters, her response came within minutes. "I'm on the next flight." By the end of the week, Amelia arrived with a small but trusted crew. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, and walked with a quiet confidence that Ethan immediately respected. She didn't bring cameras on the first day. Instead, she sat on Ethan's porch, drinking strong coffee as the two talked for hours. Ethan told her everything. From the moment he discovered the plane, to the moment he uncovered the second crash site, the cases, the letters, the missing fifth box, the journal, the film, the classified files that had somehow slipped through every declassification effort. Amelia listened without interruption, only occasionally jotting something in her worn leather notebook. When Ethan finished, she looked him straight in the eye. "If we do this," she said, "there's no going back. You'll be a target. Not physically, at least. I hope not, but reputationally. They'll say you're a fraud, that you're dishonoring veterans, that you falsified evidence." "I know," Ethan said, "but it's not about me. It's about Whitaker, Merrick, and all the others who were used, then forgotten." She smiled. "Then let's give them a voice." Over the next month, Amelia and her team filmed everything. The exact crash sites, the excavation footage, interviews with Ethan. They traced the chain of command linked to the smuggling operation, using fragments from Whitaker's journal and the sealed files to name real officials who had evaded justice for over 80 years. They uncovered a pattern of secrecy, corruption, and cover-ups that had long outlived the men who orchestrated them. And then came the emotional core. The letters from Whitaker to his wife, read aloud by a voice actor over footage of the Alabama fields. "If I don't make it home, Clara, please raise Annie to love deeply and to speak truthfully, even when the truth is heavy, especially then." It was devastating, but beautiful. Amelia titled the documentary Buried Honor: The Hidden Mission of Whitaker. It premiered online, and within 72 hours, it went viral. Viewers were stunned. Veterans wrote in by the thousands, sharing their own stories of lost friends, missing cargo, orders that didn't make sense. Historians debated every frame. Conspiracy theorists latched on, while government officials refused to comment. And then came the press conferences. A retired colonel confirmed parts of Ethan's findings. A now declassified report vaguely acknowledged unauthorized recovery operations during post-war transport efforts. It wasn't an admission, but it was no longer denial either. For Ethan, everything changed. He was invited to speak at the National Buptuawud Museum. Schools reached out, asking for copies of the film. A senator proposed a memorial for forgotten airmen lost in classified missions. Ethan stood on that stage in Montgomery, looking out at rows of people, many wiping tears from their eyes. He held up Whitaker's photo. "This man didn't die just flying a plane," Ethan said. "He died protecting something he believed should never be hidden, the truth. And now, decades later, we owe it to him and men like him to do the same." Thunderous applause followed. But even amid all the attention, Ethan stayed grounded. He still rose early every morning, still fed Buddy, still walked the fields. But now, he felt less alone. As if the land whispered back with gratitude, not just for what he found, but for what he chose to reveal. And one chilly morning, a letter arrived in his mailbox. No return address, just an envelope, sealed in wax. Inside was a single note. "You did what we couldn't. Thank you for finishing the mission." Attached to it was a small pin, the insignia of an elite WWO intelligence unit, one that had officially never existed. Ethan held the pin in his palm for a long while. Then quietly, he smiled. Ethan Carter had never planned to change the world. For most of his life, he had been content tending the soil, fixing fences and listening to the wind rustle through the fields. The farm was his entire world, predictable, silent, safe. But the silence no longer comforted him the way it once had. After the documentary exploded online, Ethan's name became synonymous with integrity, history, and truth. For a man who once feared speaking in front of a room of 5, He was now standing before hundreds, sometimes thousands, telling the story of a buried plane, a forgotten war hero, and a truth almost lost forever. But more than the attention, something deeper had changed. He had discovered a purpose. Before all this, Ethan had believed his best years were behind him. Since his wife's passing, he had simply gone through the motions: plant, harvest, repair, repeat. He had loved her with all his heart, and when she died, a piece of him did too. He withdrew from community events, ignored calls from friends, and avoided family gatherings. Solitude became his shield. But now, everything had shifted. One day, while sitting on the same porch where he once drank coffee in silence, he was joined by a group of high school students from the next town over. Their teacher, Ms. Delaney, had reached out after showing the documentary in class. "These kids, they don't just want to hear your story," she said. "They want to know how to find their own—" Ethan smiled, nervous at first, but he invited them in. He showed them the original letters, the journal, and even allowed them to walk the field where the plane had been uncovered. He told them about Whitaker, about the importance of paying attention to history, especially the pieces people try to bury. What surprised him most was how attentive they were. Not a single phone buzzed, not one eye wandered. They listened, really listened, as if they knew the weight of what he carried. After that day, something stirred inside Ethan, something he hadn't felt in years: connection. He began giving small talks at schools, libraries, and even veterans' homes, not for fame or recognition, but to honor the voices of those who came before him. He became a bridge between generations, linking the past to the present in a way textbooks never could. He received letters weekly, some from families of other MIA soldiers, others from young people inspired to study history, journalism, or military ethics. One boy from Texas wrote, "Mr. Carter, I never cared about history until I heard your story. Now I want to study aviation and uncover stories just like Whitaker's. Thank you for lighting that fire in me." That letter made Ethan cry. But this time, they weren't tears of loss. They were tears of hope. With Amelia Strauss's help, Ethan established the Whitaker Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to preserving untold military stories, supporting families of missing veterans, and funding historical education programs in underserved schools. He never imagined himself running a foundation. But now, his days were filled with something greater than crops and chores. He hosted veterans on his land, turned a section of his barn into a small memorial museum, and even partnered with the National Archives to digitize his findings for public record. People started calling his farm the Field of Truth, and Ethan welcomed it not out of pride, but out of duty. One chilly October morning, Ethan walked the field alone, Buddy at his side. Dew clung to the grass. Fog curled low like memory itself. He stopped where the plane had once lain. A simple wooden bench now sat there, facing the horizon, with a bronze plaque that read, "To those who served in silence, may your truth never be buried again." He sat down, pulled out Whitaker's journal, and flipped to the final page. His fingers traced the words. The ink had faded, but the message had not. "If someone finds this, tell my wife I didn't run. Tell my daughter I was thinking of her. And tell whoever finds me, please finish what I started." Ethan looked out over the misty landscape. He whispered, "I did. Jimmy, I promise you, I did." That evening, his phone buzzed with a message from Amelia. "The Smithsonian wants to feature your story in a permanent exhibit. You ready to go to DUPC?" Ethan laughed softly to himself, shaking his head. Years ago, the idea of traveling across the country to speak to curators, historians, and politicians would have made his stomach churn. But now, Now he understood what it meant to carry a legacy. He replied with a simple message. Let's do it, for Whitaker, for the truth. The Smithsonian was quiet that morning. Ethan Carter stood alone in the massive gallery, the hum of distant air vents and the soft footsteps of curators the only sounds echoing off the marble floors. Before him stood a restored section of the B-26 Marauder's fuselage, the very same plane that had once slept beneath the Alabama soil for nearly 8 decades. Its aluminum skin had been polished to a respectful shine, but the scars of war were left untouched bullet holes, stress fractures, rusted seams, all preserved as a tribute to the time it had endured. And beside it stood a glass case containing the photograph of Latour's James Whitaker, the leather-bound journal, the sealed letters to Clara and Annie, and the rusted dog tag recovered from the wreck. At the base of the display, etched in silver, one man's silence nearly buried the truth. One man's voice brought it back, dedicated to those who fought not just in battle, but for honesty, justice, and remembrance. Ethan didn't cry. He just stood there still, silent, full. He thought about how far the story had come from a rusted tip in the dirt to a national exhibit that would outlive him. And he knew, without a doubt, he had fulfilled the promise. Later that afternoon, the exhibit officially opened to the public. The media were there. Of course. Cameras flashed, interviews lined up, and officials from the Department of Defense gave carefully worded speeches about lessons of history and the value of transparency. But what mattered most to Ethan wasn't any of that. What mattered was when a woman approached him during the reception. She was in her early 70s, frail but graceful, with silvery hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes filled with tears. She clutched a small, crumpled envelope. "Mr. Carter," she whispered. "My name is Annie. Annie Whitaker." Ethan's breath caught. "I was just a baby when my father never came home. My mother never remarried. She kept this photo of him on the mantel until the day she died. And I always wondered if he ever thought of us, if he ever had a chance to say goodbye." Her voice shook as she handed him the envelope. "When I saw your documentary, I knew you gave him back to me." Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of the last letter Whitaker had written, one that Ethan himself had discovered and read under lamplight months ago. "Tell Annie I was thinking of her." He looked up at Annie, his voice soft. "He never stopped thinking of you, and now the world knows it." They embraced strangers by blood, but family by truth. That night, as the city lights of Washington glowed like constellations across the streets, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room, gazing out the window. He could have chosen a quiet life, no disruption, no danger, no spotlight, and for most of his years, that's exactly what he did. But fate, or maybe something deeper, had buried a secret in his soil. And rather than cover it back up, he chose to uncover it. And in doing so, he uncovered himself. In the weeks that followed, the exhibit drew tens of thousands of visitors. Veterans wept beside the case. Students took notes. Teachers built lesson plans around Ethan's discovery. The story made it into history books under a new chapter titled The Hidden Legacy of Whitaker. The Whitaker Foundation expanded into national programs. Ethan's land was named a historical landmark. And each year, on the date of the plane's discovery, dozens of families gathered there to honor loved ones who never came home, not just with flags, but with stories. And that's what mattered most. Stories. Because in the end, history isn't kept alive by statues or museums. It's kept alive by people, ordinary people, willing to speak when silence is easier. Months later, on a spring morning back in Alabama, Ethan walked the path behind his barn. Buddy trotted ahead, older now but just as loyal. In the distance, a new sign stood tall at the edge of the field. the Carter Whitaker Memorial Grove, where truth took root. Dozens of young trees had been planted there, one for every crew member lost during the secret missions uncovered by Ethan's investigation. Each tree had a name. Each name had a story. And each story now had a voice. Ethan knelt beside the tree marked Lut. James H. Whitaker rested his hand gently against the bark and whispered one final promise. "They won't forget you again." The wind answered with a soft rustle, like a salute carried through the leaves. And in that moment, under the rising sun, Ethan Carter no longer felt like a man who had found something. He felt like a man who had become something. The story of Ethan Carter and the buried warplane teaches us that truth doesn't stay buried forever, not if someone is brave enough to dig it up. Sometimes, the most extraordinary discoveries aren't made by experts or scholars, but by everyday people who choose curiosity over comfort and courage over convenience. Ethan didn't set out to become a hero or a historian, but when life placed a forgotten piece of the past in his hands, he chose to honor it. In doing so, he reminded us all that even one person's voice can echo across generations. If this story moved you, subscribe. More forgotten truths are coming. And if you believe some stories deserve to be heard, share this